My name's Grady Coleman, and 41 days after I buried my wife of 66 years, I found myself standing in the doorway of a bedroom I couldn't make myself walk into. Her housecoat was still hanging on the hook behind the door, right where she'd left it, and every morning for 6 weeks straight I opened that door, looked at it, and shut it again without ever stepping inside. My daughter kept calling it processing. My son kept calling it time. I called it drowning, real slow, in a house with too many rooms for one old man. Nobody tells you that grief this late in life doesn't come as sadness so much as silence, a whole house full of it, with nobody left to break it. What finally broke that silence for me wasn't a counselor, and it wasn't my children, God love them. It was a small fishing town in Thailand I hadn't thought about once in 89 years on this earth. And if you told me 6 months ago I'd end up there, I'd have called you a liar to your face. Hey folks, if we haven't crossed paths yet, I'm an old man from Texas who packed up whatever was left of his life and started fresh on the other side of the planet. I'm no doctor, no financial man, and I'm not here to sell you a thing today. I'm just a widower who made one hard decision late in life, and I want to walk you through the whole thing, start to finish, the good parts and the hard parts both. So settle in, because this one's going to take a while, and by the end of it, I think you'll understand exactly why an old man got on a plane he had no business getting on. Let me back up though, because you can't understand the ending without understanding where I started. I was born in 1937 on a farm about 40 minutes outside Waco, and I never really left that part of Texas my whole working life. I met Dorothy at a church social when I was 17 and she was 16, and I'm not ashamed to tell you I knew within a month that was the girl I was going to marry. We got married 2 years later. I spent 38 years working for the railroad, mostly maintenance, mostly hard-hot work, and Dorothy raised our 3 kids and kept the books for a little feed store in town for extra money. We built a life the old-fashioned way, slow and plain, one paycheck and one Sunday dinner at a time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, and I would not have traded a single dusty, sweaty day of it. Dorothy got sick in the spring, and by the fall she was gone. I won't dwell on the details because that's between me and her and the Lord, but I'll tell you it was fast in some ways and it felt endless in others. And when it was over, I found myself alone in a house we had lived in for 51 years, a house that still smelled like her hand cream, still had her reading glasses on the nightstand, still had her handwriting on the calendar in the kitchen for appointments that were never going to happen now. My daughter Linda wanted me to stay with her for a while. My son Roger called every single day, sometimes twice, and I understood why. They had just lost their mother, and they were terrified of losing their father too, right behind her. But here's the thing nobody tells you about grief when you're 89 years old. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic. Nobody in an old folks' quiet house is out there sobbing every hour of the day. What it actually is quiet. It's waking up at 5:30 because that's when you've always woken up, and making coffee in a pot that's older than some of your grandchildren, and sitting in a kitchen so silent you can hear the refrigerator hum, and realizing you have absolutely nothing you need to do and absolutely nobody who needs you to do it. I'd sit in Dorothy's chair some mornings, not even reading, just sitting, and I'd think, well, Walter, I suppose this is what's left. A man waiting quietly in a house for his own turn to come. I thought that was just what happened to old men who outlive their wives. I really did. I thought grief was a sentence you served out in silence, and that wanting to feel alive again, actually alive, was some kind of disrespect to the woman you buried. My neighbor Hal, a good man, lost his wife a few years before I lost Dorothy, and he told me once, sitting on my porch with a glass of tea, "Walter, you don't get over it, you just get used to the empty chair." And I believed him. I believed that was the whole truth of it, that there was nothing left to do but get used to the empty chair and wait. What I didn't understand back then, and it took me traveling 10,000 miles to figure it out, is that the emptiness in that house wasn't only grief. Some of it was grief, sure, that never fully leaves, and I wouldn't want it to. But a good part of what was eating me alive in that house was something else entirely. It was the absence of anybody needing me. It was the silence of a neighborhood where everybody's grown and gone and working and too busy to knock on an old man's door. It was 3 meals a day cooked for one person in a kitchen built for a family of 5. Most people never stop to ask themselves how much of their sadness is actually about the person they lost.
and how much of it is about the life around them going quiet at the exact same time.
My daughter Linda, bless her, started doing what a lot of good children do. She brought me pamphlets, places with names like Meadowbrook Senior Living and Cedar Trails, glossy photos of old folks doing watercolor painting and playing bingo under fluorescent lights. She never said the words nursing home, she was too gentle for that, but I could read between the lines just fine. What she was really saying was, "Daddy, we don't know how to keep you alive out here by yourself, so let somebody else do it." And I understood the love behind it. But sitting there looking at those pamphlets, I felt something harden in my chest because I thought, I have never once in my life been somebody's problem to solve, and I am not about to start now. Now here's where the story gets a little strange, so bear with me. My grandson Cody, Linda's boy, works at the VA hospital in Waco doing physical therapy, and he had a colleague there, a young Thai fellow named Nat, who'd married an American girl and settled in Texas. Cody brought Nat by the house one Sunday not long after the funeral just to check on me, and Nat and I got to talking on the porch. He told me about his mother back in a coastal town in Thailand called Hua Hin, how she was in her 70s and still ran a little noodle stand every morning, how the whole neighborhood looked out for each other, how nobody there ever really felt alone even when they lived by themselves. He showed me pictures on his phone, palm trees along a quiet beach, old men playing checkers under a pavilion, a grandmother surrounded by neighbors' children who weren't even her own blood. I don't know why that conversation stuck with me the way it did, but it did. That night I couldn't sleep, and instead of lying there staring at the ceiling the way I'd been doing for weeks, I got up and I did something I hadn't done in years. I got curious about something other than my own sorrow. I started looking things up on that old laptop Roger had set up for me. Cost of living in Thailand, retired Americans living in Hua Hin, what Thai healthcare actually looks like for an old man with a bad hip and high blood pressure. I read for hours, and somewhere in there, something that had gone dark in me flickered just a little. I kept it to myself for a good while. I didn't tell Linda or Roger because I could already hear what they'd say, and honestly, I didn't blame them for it. I just kept reading quietly, night after night. I found forums full of retired folks, mostly Americans, British, Australians, living out their years in towns up and down the Thai coast. Some of them said it was the best decision they ever made. Some of them said they'd gone home after a year, homesick and frustrated. But the ones who'd stayed 5, 10, 15 years, they all said something close to the same thing. It's not perfect, but I'm not invisible here, and I was invisible back home. After about 2 months of quiet research, I decided I wasn't going to make some grand permanent decision from my kitchen table. I decided I'd take one trip, 3 weeks. I'd go see Hua Hin with my own 2 tired old eyes, and if it was foolishness, if an 89-year-old man had no business being there, I'd come home and never speak of it again. I told Linda I was taking a trip with a church group to see some temples, which wasn't entirely a lie since I did intend to see a temple or two. I just left out the part about the airfare in the 3 weeks. When she found out the truth 2 days before I left, there were a lot of tears and a fair amount of arguing, but by then my bag was packed and my mind, for the first time in months, was made up about something. I want to be honest with you about that flight because it was rough. Waco to Dallas, Dallas to Los Angeles to Bangkok. A flight that alone runs somewhere around 17 or 18 hours in the air, and then a short hop down the coast to Hua Hin. My back has never forgiven me, and neither has my knee. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean in the middle of the night, with everybody around me asleep, and the little map on the screen showing our plane crawling along like a slow bug over all that blue, I had a thought that surprised me. I thought nobody where I'm going ever knew me with Dorothy. To them, I'll just be a new old man who showed up, and strange as it sounds, that felt less lonely than the alternative. We landed, and the heat hit me the second the door of that little plane opened, thick and warm, nothing at all like the dry Texas heat I'd known my whole life. Nat's cousin had arranged for someone to meet me, a young man named Ploy, driving an old but well-kept van, and he held up a sign with my name spelled wrong, Walter Huygens, and grinned so wide when he saw me that I didn't have the heart to correct him.
He loaded my 2 suitcases in, and we drove along a coastal road with the sea on one side, fishing boats bobbing out past the shallows, and little roadside stalls selling grilled corn and fruit I couldn't name. It was chaos in its own gentle way, motorbikes weaving, vendors calling out, and somewhere underneath all that noise I felt something in my chest loosen just a touch for the first time since the funeral. I stayed those first 3 weeks in a small guest house a short walk from the beach, run by a couple who'd been renting rooms there for over 20 years. Every morning I'd sit on a little plastic stool at a food stall just up the road, run by an older woman everybody called May, and she'd bring me rice porridge with ginger and a little fish without me ever needing to ask twice, because by the third morning she already knew what the old American liked. There is a particular kind of comfort in a stranger deciding what you're going to eat before you even sit down, and I hadn't felt that kind of comfort since Dorothy used to do the very same thing. Now let me tell you plainly about the parts that matter to your wallet, because I know a lot of you watching are not wealthy men and women, and neither am I. My railroad pension and Social Security together give me a fixed income, and I want to be honest that costs shift with the exchange rate and the neighborhood and the year, so take these as one old man's real experience and not gospel. In Hua Hin, I rent a modest one-bedroom apartment a short walk from the beach for what works out to somewhere in the range of $350 to $450 a month, furnished, with a fan and an air conditioner in the bedroom. My electricity, mostly from running that air conditioner at night, runs another $60 to $80 some months. A full plate of food at a local stall runs $1 or $2, and even eating out for most meals, my food bill some months doesn't crest $150. I want to give you an analogy because Dorothy always said I explain things better with a picture in your head. Living on a fixed income back in Texas felt to me like trying to keep a bathtub full with the drain wide open. You're pouring water in as fast as you can and it's draining out just as fast, and you never get ahead, you just tread water and hope the pipes don't burst. Here in Hua Hin, that same amount of water fills the tub and there's some left over besides. It's not that I got richer, it's that the tub itself is smaller, and the same modest pension that barely covered me in Texas covers me here with room to spare, room enough that I'm not lying awake doing arithmetic in my head at 2 in the morning anymore. Healthcare is the piece that worried my children the most, and I understand why, because I'm not a young man and I've got the hip and the blood pressure to prove it. I want to be careful here because I am not a doctor, and I am not going to sit here and tell you Thai healthcare works exactly like American healthcare, because it doesn't, and anybody who tells you otherwise on the internet is selling you something. What I can tell you from my own experience is that Hua Hin has a proper hospital, clean, modern, with doctors who trained in some cases in the United States or the UK and speak good English, and that a general checkup with blood work for me ran somewhere around $30 to $50. No waiting weeks for an appointment, no mountain of paperwork first. For anything serious, and I mean truly serious, folks I've met here tell me you'd want to be in Bangkok, which is a few hours up the road where the bigger private hospitals are. I did have a scare about 4 months in, and I think it's only fair I tell you about it honestly, because a story with no hard parts isn't a true story. I woke up one morning with a tightness in my chest that frightened me plenty given my age and my history. A neighbor of mine, a retired school teacher named Sumsri, who lives 2 doors down, and had taken to checking on the strange old American most mornings, noticed I hadn't come out for my coffee and knocked on my door. She got me to the hospital herself in her own car before I'd even fully decided I ought to go. It turned out to be nothing more than bad indigestion and a scare, but I want you to sit with that for a second the way I had to. Back in Texas, alone in that house, nobody would have known I hadn't gotten up that morning until it was too late to matter. Here, somebody noticed within the hour. That's the piece I think gets left out of most conversations about growing old alone, and it's the piece that changed everything for me. It isn't really about beaches or cheap rent, though I'll take both gladly. It's about being seen in Thai culture, and I want to be careful to say this is what I've witnessed with my own eyes and not some grand claim about an entire country. There is a deep respect for older people that runs through daily life in a way I hadn't experienced in years back home. Younger folks greet you with a little bow, a gesture called a Y, hands pressed together, and there's a real courtesy given to age here that I'm not sure we hold on to quite the same way in America anymore. I'm not saying one way is right and one is wrong. I'm only telling you what an old man felt the first time a teenager on a motorbike stopped to make sure I got across a busy street safely, unasked, like it was simply what you do. Let me tell you about a fellow named Boonmi, because talking about him still puts a lump in my throat. Boonmi is a retired fisherman, 74 years old, who spends his mornings mending nets down by the pier not far from where I walk. The first time I sat down near him just to watch the boats, he didn't say a word of English, and I don't speak a lick of Thai, but he handed me half of whatever he was eating out of a banana leaf like it was the most natural thing in the world. We sit together most mornings now. We don't talk much because we can't, but there's a kind of companionship in sitting quietly next to another old man watching the tide come in that I hadn't felt since Dorothy used to sit beside me on our own porch back home. Some things don't need a shared language. I also want to tell you about the reading group because it surprised me more than almost anything else here. A small community center not far from my apartment runs an English conversation class for local kids twice a week, and one of the other expats invited me to come sit in and just talk with the children so they could practice. I'm no school teacher. I spent my whole life around rail ties and diesel engines, but I went mostly out of boredom that first time. There's a little girl there named Nan, maybe 8 years old, who has decided I am her personal grandfather, and she asks me the same question nearly every week. Grandpa Walter, is it true it snows where you're from? And every time I answer her, something in my chest that had gone quiet for months wakes back up a little more. There's another fellow I want you to meet, an Englishman named Arthur, who's lived in Hua Hin close to 15 years now, and I met him the way you meet most folks out here, sitting near each other at a coffee stand until eventually you just start talking. Arthur lost his own wife back in Yorkshire a good while before he ever came out this way, and he told me something over that first cup of coffee that I've carried with me since. He said, "Walter, the mistake most fellows make is they think they're running away from something when they leave, but really the good ones are running towards something. They just don't know what it is yet until they land in the middle of it." Arthur's become something like an older brother to me these past months, and he was the one who walked me through finding a proper visa agent instead of trusting a stranger on the internet, which I'm grateful for every single day. I should also tell you about the market, because if there's one place that shows you the texture of daily life here, it's the morning market, a short walk from my apartment. Long tables piled with fruit I'd never seen back in Texas. Dragon fruit and rambutan and mangoes so ripe they practically fall apart in your hand. Fish laid out on ice that was swimming that same morning. Vendors calling out prices that are honest and fair once you're a familiar face instead of a passing tourist. There's a woman there named Ploy, no relation to the driver who picked me up that first day, who sells me my fruit every week, and she scolds me gently if I don't come by for a few days, the same way Dorothy used to scold me if I skipped a meal she'd cooked. It is a small thing being scolded lovingly by a fruit vendor, but small things like that add up to something that starts to feel very much like belonging. Now, I don't want you thinking this has all been sunshine and coconut water, because it hasn't, and I promised you I'd be straight with you. The heat took real getting used to. Texas summers are hot, but this is a different animal. Thick and heavy, and for the first 2 months I sweated through my shirt just walking to the market. The language barrier is real too, and while plenty of folks in a town like Hua Hin speak enough English to get by, plenty don't, and there were afternoons early on where I stood at a pharmacy counter, feeling about as helpless as a newborn calf, pointing and gesturing like a fool. You have to be willing to laugh at yourself out here, because you will find yourself in some foolish situations. And there's no shame in that, only in refusing to try. The paperwork is another matter I want to speak to plainly, because I don't want any of you thinking you can just show up and stay forever on a tourist stamp. Thailand has a retirement visa arrangement for folks over 50, and there are financial requirements involved, deposits in a Thai bank and proof of income, and the specific rules have shifted over the years, and I expect they'll shift again, so I am not going to sit here and quote you exact figures as gospel truth, because by the time you're watching this, something may well have changed. What I will tell you, and I mean this as strongly as I can say anything, is don't trust some fellow on a Facebook group with your visa paperwork. Find a proper immigration lawyer or a licensed visa agent here in Thailand, pay them their fee and get it done right, because I've met men out here who cut corners on that and it costs them a great deal more in the end than the fee would have. I also need to say something about scams, because it would be dishonest of me not to. There are folks here, same as anywhere in the world, who see an old foreign man with a pension and see a target instead of a person. I've heard of fellows who got taken advantage of by a friendly face who turned out to want nothing but their bank account number. My advice, and it's the same advice Samsri gave me my first month here, is go slow. Don't hand money to anybody you've known less than a good long while, and if a new friendship suddenly starts needing your wallet, that's your signal to step back and think clearly. This is not a reason to distrust everybody. Most folks here have been nothing but decent to me, but a wise old man keeps his wits about him no matter how kind a place seems. Now let me tell you what actually happened with my children, because I think this part matters most of all. Linda was furious when I first told her I intended to stay longer than the 3 weeks. She flew out here herself about 2 months in, half convinced she was going to find her father living in squalor, being taken advantage of by strangers. I met her at the little airport and I watched her guard come down slowly over the 5 days she stayed. She saw my apartment, clean and simple. She met Samsri, who fussed over her the same way she fusses over me. She sat with me in Bunmi down by the pier one evening, not understanding a word, and she told me afterward, with tears in her eyes, "Daddy, I haven't seen you laugh like that since before Mama got sick." That was worth more to me than anything I could have bought back in Texas. Roger took longer to come around because Roger has always been the practical one, wanting numbers and plans instead of feelings. He flew out about 6 months in and grilled me the whole visit about my savings, my insurance, what would happen if I fell and broke a hip, all fair questions from a son who loves his father. I showed him my international health coverage, my arrangement with Samsri and the neighbors who check on me, the visa paperwork I'd had done properly by a licensed agent in Bangkok. By the end of his visit, he admitted grudgingly, the way practical men do, that I'd actually thought this through better than he expected. That admission meant the world to a father who'd spent months feeling like a burden to be managed instead of a man to be trusted. Let me talk to you about an ordinary day now, because I think the ordinary days tell you more truth than any highlight reel ever could. I wake most mornings around 5:30, same as I always have, but now instead of silence, there's the sound of the town waking up outside my window, motorbikes, a rooster somewhere that never did learn to keep to a schedule, the smell of somebody's cooking fire drifting up from the street. I walk down to May's stall for coffee and rice porridge, and I sit with Bunmi a while down by the pier. Twice a week I go to the community center and let little Nan practice her English on me, and I've started, at 89 years old, learning a handful of Thai words myself, which she finds endlessly hilarious given how badly I mangle them. In the afternoons, when the heat is at its worst, I rest, same as any sensible old man would. And some days Samsri brings over something she's cooked, insisting she made too much, which I am fairly certain is a kind lie she tells every single time. In the evenings I walk the beach road while the sun goes down over the water, and more often than not somebody I've come to know stops to say hello, ask how I'm doing, tell me about their day. I have not eaten a single dinner truly alone since I arrived here, not once. And I want you to sit with that, because in Texas, in that big quiet house, I ate every single dinner alone for months, and I had resigned myself to thinking that was simply what the rest of my life was going to look like. I think about Dorothy every single day, and I want to be honest that moving here has not erased my grief, nor would I want it to, because that grief is the last living thread I have to 66 years with the finest woman I ever knew. What I've learned, though, and it took a wise old woman here to help me see it, is that keeping myself half dead in an empty house wasn't honoring Dorothy. It was just wasting the years she'd have wanted me to still enjoy. Samsri said something to me once in her careful English that I think about constantly. She said, "Your wife is not in the sadness, Walter. She is in the living you still have left to do." I believe that now with my whole heart. If you are watching this and you've lost somebody after a long life together, or you're watching on behalf of a parent who has, I want to speak to you plainly for a moment the way I'd speak to my own children. I am not telling you Thailand is the answer for everybody because it isn't, and I've met folks out here who tried it and went home within a year, homesick and unhappy, and there is not one thing wrong with that. This is not for everyone, and that's all right. What I am telling you is that an empty house does not have to be the last chapter, and being an old man does not mean you've run out of chances to be needed by somebody. Loneliness is not a life sentence just because you've lived a long life already. Let me give you a practical picture of what a first step might actually look like, because I don't want to leave you with just feelings and no plan. And I know some of you are the practical sort, same as my son Roger. Step one, if you are grieving, please talk to somebody, a counselor, a pastor, a good friend, before you make any big decision, because I did that first and it mattered, even though the counseling alone didn't fix what was broken in me. Step two, if a place like this calls to you even a little, take a short trip first, 3 or 4 weeks, before you sell a single stick of furniture, and see how your body and your heart actually respond to it, because a video on a screen is not the same as standing there yourself. Step 3, if you decide to go further, get your paperwork done properly with a licensed professional. Get real health insurance that covers you internationally, and be honest with your family early rather than springing it on them the way I nearly did. I'd add a step 4 to that list, and it's the one I almost skipped myself. Before you commit to anything permanent, spend real time in the actual neighborhood you're considering, not just the tourist strip. Walking the same streets at the same hours a local resident would, eating at the same stalls, sitting at the same coffee shops, because that's where you'll learn whether a place can hold you or whether it was only ever going to be a pleasant visit. I nearly stayed in a hotel zone my first week here, all resorts and souvenir shops, and it wasn't until I wandered a few streets back and found May's little stall and Bun Mi's spot on the pier that I understood what this town actually was underneath the postcard version of it. Let me tell you a bit more about what I mean by aging with dignity out here, because it's a phrase folks throw around loosely, and I want to give it some real weight. Back in Texas, growing old often meant slowly disappearing from the flow of everyday life. Fewer invitations, fewer errands that needed doing, fewer reasons to leave the house at all. Here, age is not treated as a problem to be managed quietly out of sight. Bun Mi still mends his nets every morning at 74. May still runs her food stall in her 70s. Nobody has suggested to either of them that it's time to sit in a chair somewhere and wait. I've found that same expectation settling over me too, that an old man is still useful, still welcome, still expected to show up, and I cannot tell you how much that has done for whatever dignity I've got left in these old bones. I also want to say something about staying connected to the folks back home, because that worried me plenty before I came. I video call Linda and Roger every single week, and it is not the same as sitting across the table from them. I won't pretend it is, and there have been nights I've felt the distance sharply, especially around the holidays. But the calls are real, and Linda has already been out twice, and Roger is talking half joking and half serious about bringing his own wife out here to see it once he retires himself. My grandson Cody keeps saying he wants to visit before he starts his own family. The distance is a real cost, and I won't lie to you about that, but it has not cost me the relationships themselves, only the easy nearness of them. And I found that a phone call from a man who sounds alive again means a great deal more to my children than a nearby father who sounded half dead every time they called. I want to close out the practical talk by being honest about what this life is not. It is not paradise, and anybody who tells you a place on earth is free of hardship is either young and hasn't lived long enough to know better, or they're trying to sell you a plane ticket. The brownouts happen here same as anywhere in the tropics, the power flickering off for an hour or two during a storm. The bureaucracy can be slow and confusing if you don't have good help. The heat, I'll say it one more time, is not for the faint of heart, and I still haven't fully made my peace with it after all these months. And there are days quieter than you'd expect where the missing of Dorothy and the missing of my old life in Texas both sit heavy on my chest at the same time, and I let myself feel that instead of running from it. I'll add one more honest warning while I'm at it, because Arthur made me promise I would. Do not, under any circumstances, sign a long lease or hand over a large sum of money to anybody in your first few months here, no matter how kind they seem or how good the deal sounds. Arthur watched a good friend of his lose a fair chunk of his savings that way in his first year, trusting the wrong smiling face too quickly. Rent month to month at first, keep your larger savings in an account back home you control, and let trust build slowly the way it did for me with Samsri and Boonmi in May over months of small kindnesses, not one big promise. A place can be full of genuinely good people and still have a few who aren't, same as anywhere else on this earth, and a clear head serves you better than a hopeful heart in matters of money. But here is what I've landed on, sitting here at 89 years old with whatever years the good Lord sees fit to give me left. I spent months in that house outside Waco waiting to die quietly and calling it grief, when really a good part of what was killing me slowly was being unseen, unneeded, and alone in a way I had never once been in 66 years of marriage. I didn't need a miracle cure, and I didn't need to stop grieving my wife. What I needed, and what I think a great many of you watching this might need too, whether you've lost a spouse or simply lost the feeling that anybody's paying attention to whether you're still here, was somebody to notice if I didn't show up for my coffee one morning. It turns out you cannot buy that back home with all the pension money in the world if the life around you has gone quiet. You can only find it by going somewhere that still knows how to make room for a stranger and letting yourself be folded in. I'll tell you plainly, if you are sitting in a quiet house right now, however many years you've got left, however far along in life you feel, you are allowed to go looking for a reason to keep going. It is not a betrayal of the person you lost, and it is not foolishness just because you're old. I very nearly stayed home in that quiet Texas house and let the rest of my life pass by the same way the last few months of it had, sitting in Dorothy's chair waiting. I'm awful glad at 89 years old that I rattled the handle on one more door before I gave up entirely. I think about that fellow I was 3 months before this recording, sitting in that funeral parlor, sure that the rest of his life would be nothing but an empty chair and a quiet kitchen, and I wish I could reach back and tell him what was waiting on the other side of one long, uncomfortable flight. Not a cure for grief, because there isn't one, and I wouldn't want there to be. Just a town full of people willing to notice an old stranger, and a reason, most mornings, to get up before the sun without an alarm clock telling me I had to. So let me ask you something before I let you go today, because I'd genuinely like to know, if you've lost somebody you built a whole life with, what has actually helped you keep going, and if you haven't, what's holding you back right now from making some kind of change, big or small, in the life you're living? Write it down in the comments if you're willing, because I read every single one of them, and I suspect there's somebody else watching this who needs to hear your answer as much as I did. Take care of yourselves out there. Life is shorter than any of us like to admit. Even at 89 years old, I'm learning that lesson fresh most days, and it is never too late to build a little more living into whatever time you've got left. I'll see you in the next one from right here on the coast of Hua Hin, Thailand.